Hello. We have a double Joe case today. Slightly unusual pairing of games. But you know, games that I've been meaning to stream for a little while, so I was like, it doesn't matter that they don't sort of go. The theme, I guess, is monsters. We're starting off with Twice Reborn, a vampire visual novel. We're going to do an hour and a half. Let's see how far we get. And then we'll move on to our second game. So this one came out beginning of last year, which is why I said it's been on my list for a little while. We are trying to be varied in our which games we're going for, and make sure we pick stuff that, you know, may have been waiting a while, or, you know, may not. Just, you know, I said January is going to be lots of new games being started, so that's what we're doing. So we're starting off with Twice Reborn, a vampire visual novel which is published by East Asia Soft, developed by First Step Cinematics in conjunction with Ratalaika Games and East Asia Soft, because it's written in Ren'Py, which doesn't port naturally to the console, so that's usually where Ratalaika comes in. So yeah, it's as I said, 22nd of February. Well, I didn't say, I said early last year. 22nd of February last year, 2023. It's available on PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, and PC. On Xbox, which is what we're playing on, it's £12.49 or $14.99. So this game, choose to embrace your new role as a vampire or seek a way to reclaim your humanity, is the tagline. If you crossed a vampire, would you protect humanity or embrace the blood? In Twice Reborn, teaching assistant Mark Delaware becomes a newly turned vampire in a community forced to play behind it in plain sight. His mentor, Michelson, has trusted Mark to become the Enforcer, a feared arbiter who keeps the quarrelling vampiric houses following the code. When arson kills key vampires in the community, it's up to Mark to either embrace his vampirism or find a way to regain his humanity. Fluff everywhere. Interacting with humans and vampires is a delicate balance. Not all appreciate Mark's decision, and not all relationships can last. Some want him dead, while others want him for their own. Mark's responses in the perilous community changes their reactions as well as the story's outcome. I believe all the achievements are marked as missable rather than storyline, so though this is one of those novels where you can just whiz through, so unsure why they're marked as storyline as missable, because it's a visual novel. We are going to play it properly and actually read it. There will probably be a Scottish vampire, because why not? So there are 12 achievements, and yeah, I think they basically depend on what decisions you make as to which ones you get in a playthrough. So we'll see what we get and see how far we get through the story. Sorry, just checking to see. Sorry, I was just checking to see if there were any issues with the game. It's been out long enough that it should be good. So yeah, let's without further ado, load it up, switch over. I like the art. I am me. Alright, there was an additional cushion showing. Please select a language. All characters appearing in this work are fictitious. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. Bingo. Cushions are all gone wonky over here. There we go. Couldn't get my laptop down straight. So yeah, right. I think I need a bit more volume. Okie dokes. So extra, we've got some audio. Oh, what's this? Oh, it's the credits. Very loud music. Oh, it has voice actors. Interesting. I have to skip through them because I can't get to the back button. Ah! Back button is the menu button. I need to go through all this actually. Let's background music, please. Thank you. Less sound effects. Voice is good. Alright, we're not going to skip because we're playing this. That's just better. It's just very loud menu music. So we're going to be vampire. I mean, tend towards if we can be human, that would be great. Okay, New Year's Eve 1999. Oh, there's a status. Oh, I like it when it has one of these. So apparently you can have relationships with Jodie twins, Johnny and Ricky. There is a bloodless status. Enforcer, House of Skulls, and Humanity. Okay. Damien.
We're closing.
Teenager quickly stepped inside, walked directly to the aisle she wanted, grabbed an action film, placed the DVD in front of the clerk.
That'll be $3.49.
Okay, I can't decide if the audio's leaking or not. Damien stood behind the counter of the video rental store and waited for his 53rd customer that day to count her change. She smacked her gum. He squinted his black line eyes when she didn't place the body on the counter. Shaking her head, her large hoop earrings jangled.
It's getting expensive here.
Damien sighed and looked at the clock. 30 more minutes until his shift ended.
We have the VHS version. It's cheaper.
Cool. I like that it's voiced. Not a lot of visual novels are. Okay, so I'm going to be the narrator. Hi. I maybe should have made the narrator Scottish, but the narrator currently is a person who has stuffed up nose. At this point, it's either the tail end of a cold or it's allergies, or it could be both. So, we may take a pause at one point to blow it.
I'm sure. If I wanted a VHS, I would have gotten one, pendejo.
Rolling her eyes, she paid and swiped the renter from the counter before striding away. Finally, he was alone. 30 minutes until the next millennium. Maybe if he was lucky, Y2K, the blackout from all computers would shut down the damn place. Based on how the news was reporting, everyone expected it. It was always the same work of stacking shelves and checking out customers. He missed when he had time just for himself. This was one of the few businesses in town open late, so they always had the misfits, the stragglers, the late-night date crowds, but the rest of the small town was quiet. He couldn't care less. His life wasn't going to change in 15 minutes. Nothing new happened in this town. It was 3 years since he graduated high school, and he still had the same job. Excuse me. Pressing play on his CD player, he flipped open a guitar magazine he kept next to the register. His mind wandered. The door chimed, and a tall man walked in. I thought the character we were playing was called something else. Mark. Yeah, Mark Delaware. So not Damien or Ricky. Oh, something about the stiffing. It's going to get annoying. Damien recognised him on sight, another loner like him. Ricky came to town months ago. Damien sometimes joined this wanderer for a cigarette after work because he had nothing better to do. And even that night, Ricky wore an outfit that looked like he stepped from a greaser movie. Damien never understood his obsession with vintage goods. Ricky was a little odd, but so was he. Well, I mean, that's probably when he was turned, assuming vampires at this point.
What's up? Happy Millennium. Are you gonna watch the fireworks?
Nah, I'm heading out. It's time for me to be leaving. Happy 2000, man.
He even sounds like someone from Greece. Damien's stomach sank. Ricky was planning to move on to the next place. Been talking about it for days.
Where are you going?
I'm skipping this Loserville. Wanted to stop and say goodbye.
I get it. Call me when you get to the next stop.
Grin stretched Ricky's face.
Don't worry. I'll make sure to keep in touch. Life's too short to stay in one place. There's a fresh 1,000 years waiting out there. Gotta experience it. I know. Let's do something to celebrate. No one's gonna come in this late. It's good timing.
I can't go smoke if that's what you're thinking. Shift's almost up, and I have a date with Chenshu.
I was thinking of getting something to eat.
But the only place that's open tonight is the Chinese restaurant on Main Street.
Ricky's usual I don't give a shit grin was gone as he walked up to the counter. Damien felt a chill. I think tonight he is the food. Oh my.
Who wants Chinese? I have something extra fresh in mind.
Wait, what?
Sharp teeth broke Damien's flesh. Ooh. His body slammed into a cabinet. Damien punched Ricky in the side. As he pulled back for a second punch, his arm was grabbed by Ricky. Fingers bruised Damien and his arms were forced to his side. Ricky bit again.
Let go, you freak! What are you?
Ricky's eyes shone with an eerie light. He pulled away from Damien. His crimson-stained lips formed a grotesque grin as he bitterly laughed.
Freak? No, man. You'll understand soon.
Ricky's breath reeked of copper. Damien winced as he was dropped to the floor with a thud. Ricky laughed as he left the video store, his soft words echoing in Damien's mind.
To the new millennium.
3 hours later. Falling New Year's balloons danced on the video store's monitor as another time zone celebrated Y2K. A newscaster proudly boasted that the massive computer crash that was expected hadn't happened anywhere in the world. Nah, it didn't, because thousands and thousands of people made sure that it didn't. You know, they weren't just going to leave it, they made it so they fixed it. Same problem's going to come again when the everyone using a Unix timestamp hits the end of the integer capacity, which I think is like 2049. But I can't remember off the top of my head. I've got 2049 stuck in my head though for some reason. But anyway. People celebrated the new day and danced in the streets, but it was quiet in videos and games to go. The door swung open and a cute teen wearing a short skirt entered the store.
Damien? Sweetie, where are you? You were late picking me up.
After a glance at the counter, she knew no one was there. Oh. He said her name. Genju, I think. Became distracted as her eyes scanned the colourful rows of neat shelved movie boxes. Browsing a section, she picked up a film title from the shelf before returning it. It was too quiet. As much as Damien hated his job, he would never leave the lights on and the entrance unlocked. He better haven't forgotten about their date. Walk around. She walks between the shelves, looking down the aisles for her boyfriend. She crosses empty space after empty space. She walks towards the register. Damien's magazine and his CD player was out on the counter, but he was nowhere nearby. A metallic scent teased the air. Her shoes squished down into the carpet. With a frown, she looked down. Large spots of blood stained the carpet around her toes. She screamed. Tiptoeing through the blood, she stepped around the counter and prayed her boyfriend wasn't dead.
Damien!
No one was there. Her heart pounded. What if the attacker was still inside? She ran to the front of the store. She reached for the doors, but they were locked. She pulled against them, pounded her small fists against the glass.
Help! Somebody!
Her hands shook as she pulled out her flip-open keypad cell phone to call. Well, that was a very long description. She pulled out her cell phone to call 911. A calm voice came from behind her.
I'm right here.
Two arms grabbed her from behind. Chenju dropped her phone on the floor. A sharp pain came as she felt her life fading away. Twice Reborn. Da da da. 2010. So 10 years later. TA Mark Delaware, so teaching assistant then, not true achievements, ran past a no standing on the grass sign as he bypassed sprinklers, leapt over a hedge, and landed in a patch of freshly dug dirt. He muttered as he ran with his collared shirt half tucked in his hair, half brushed. Mark tore a bite from his bagel before stuffing it in his mouth. The bells of St. George's University echoed and Mark cursed. Picking up his pace, he waved to the groundsman as he turned a corner and nearly crashed into one of the Catholic institution's blue-robed monks. He shook his head in quiet disapproval.
Sorry, Brother Luke. I'll see you later in French.
Mark held up his hands in apology, sidestepped him and entered into the history building. With a strong stride, he approached the double doors of the auditorium. He paused. Behind those heavy doors was Professor Mickelson's Ancient Civilizations class, filled with 500 underclassmen. A glance to his watch told him he was 10 minutes late. He finished chewing his bite of bagel, took a deep breath and opened the door. Wow. It's okay, it's empty. Professor Steve Michelson. Oh no, it's the Michelsons! Anyone else watched Vampire Diaries looked up from the lectern and narrowed his eyes at his teaching assistant. Without missing a beat at his lesson, his booming voice continued about the advancements of ancient Roman housing. Mark didn't miss the look. His dew-covered canvas shoes squeaked as he slunk low into one of the empty aisle seats. He knew he was going to get a lecture after the class on punctuality. A sweet voice whispered at his side.
You're late again.
Jodie Phelps was auditing Professor Michelson's class that semester. Whenever the professor was talking animatedly about the past, she intently listened. She'd lean forwards and furiously type notes on her laptop. Her varied expressions are what Mark found charming. She opened a new window on the laptop. With its touch screen, she began to doodle. Mark wondered what she could be up to. She tossed her blonde hair over her shoulders. She pouted in concentration. Mark's eyes followed her movements and started to look at her pale pink sweater. She was so focused, she did not even notice his gaze. Jodie slid the screen towards Mark. He had to slap her hand over his mouth to keep from bursting out in laughter in the middle of the class. There on the screen was a caricature of the professor as a dragon with fire coming from his mouth. Small Mark was getting hit by the flames.
I wouldn't lose. A knight always defeats the dragon.
Dude, you're not the knight. Jodie rolled her eyes. Mark squirmed in his seat, and as he did so, he felt the cold squish of mud between his toes. Ew, you need new shoes, mate. Behind him was a trail of mud footprints down the carpet to his seat. Jodie followed his gaze, her mouth popped open in surprise.
Mark, ever heard of wiping your feet?
Mark turned his attention to the professor and wondered if he'd also seen the mess. However, the professor was completely involved in his story. In the hushed auditorium, students were drawn to him, eyes and ears locked to his every word and expression. Despite Professor Michelson's nerdy look of tweed jackets and bow ties, he wasn't an awkward man. His words invoked an unexpected, powerful charisma. He dove into tales of ancient Rome or the Middle Ages as if he knew what it was like to have once lived then. Because he made class fun, the packed classroom students liked him no matter how much he challenged them. Professor Michelson was one of the most respected instructors at the university. He's probably a vampire too. There were rumours about the professor's age, that he'd been teaching at St. George's for 20 years. However, the academic looked in his late 30s. His brown brush-backed hair had moments of white. His keen eyes never missed a student out of place. Mark reached over to Jodie's laptop and pulled up a new screen. Jodie looked up in surprise. He wrote, "Want to go out?"
Yeah, sounds good.
Mark typed, "Friday, lunch at Dave's Diner?" Jodie nodded yes. Mark beamed. I'm going to go with the second one, though he didn't want to admit it, he was serious about her.
That concludes our section on ancient Roman housing. Make sure you read the readings.
1 second.
Oh, and Mr. Mark Delaware, I will speak with you after class.
And if that's any better, anyway. Student heckles came from somewhere in the hall as Mark sank down in his seat. It was not good for the teacher's assistant to be the one called to the front. Mark knew the professor's lectures almost by heart, but maybe he should have at least acted like he was focused on his mentor. Jodie gave a big smile and winked to Mark before skipping out the door. Sure, she didn't have to listen to Michelson. Mark reluctantly waved goodbye, then wriggled through the mass of students making their way out of the auditorium. Professor Michelson gave short answers to the small line of them who lingered behind. Few of them were no to Mark. Desperate to make an A, they'd ask 1,000 questions or try to beg for extra credit, a tactic that never worked. Others in line were the ladies who had a crush on the professor. Mark had heard them say that Michelson was mysterious, hot and sexy. Would they be so interested in a man who spent his days wreathing in a basement office? After 10 minutes of answering questions, Professor Michelson finally shuffled his students out the doorway. Mark wondered if he'd get a long or short lecture this time. He cleared his throat to get Michelson's attention.
Yes, sir?
Yeah. Professor Michelson paused before answering.
Mark, 4 years ago, you were the only freshman out of 5 students who got an A in my largest class. By some miracle, you're still on the dean's list. Yet your timeliness has not improved since the day you enrolled.
With a slow shake of his head, he made his way around the lecture pulpit and off the platform. Mark started to protest, but realised he'd better keep his mouth shut. Adjusting his patched backpack over his shoulders, the TA followed as Michelson continued speaking.
Come with me, we must speak. I know you don't have class with Brother Luke today until 10, so we should have some time.
You expect we'll need that long?
Michelson only replied with a frown. Mark quickly nodded. Brother Luke talked in French in the morning. Along with French, Mark was quick to also pick up Russian and Greek. Languages fed his soul, and he would spend hours getting lost in their study. That was one real reason why history fascinated Mark. He would love to be able to read primary source documents as they were meant to be read. Okay, Mark had to admit it. He was a little bit of a nerd. That's okay, mate. Looking at his watch to double-check what the professor said, he saw there was plenty of time to speak with Professor Michelson and still grab a coffee before the brothers' class. As they left the auditorium, Mark saw the damage his canvas sneakers left behind. A galaxy of dirty footprints decorated the polished wooden floor. He closed his eyes and hoped Professor Michelson didn't see the evidence. The older man did and gave Mark a knowing smile. Instead of crossing the muck and walking through the crucifix-topped main doors, the professor led the way out a side passage. It was a perfect North Colorado day. The skies were clear and it was a constant 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The beautiful campus was quiet, far from dredging traffic and lost tourists. The guitarist plucked at acoustic strings. He sat on a blanket beneath one of the many stone statues placed around the campus. Michelson kept to the shade as he avoided stepping on students stretching themselves over the sidewalk and sleeping on the pine-shaded grass. A few broke campus rules and smoked on the lawn. The grassy scent overpowered the fresh air. Mark coughed and picked up his pace. The professor frowned at the students but continued to lead the way. A few buildings later, they arrived at Michelson's office. Unlike the other faculty with tenure, Michelson never took an office with a large window. I wonder why. His cramped office was in the basement of the faculty building and had a small window near the ceiling with thick, short curtains that blocked out all sunlight. Despite its basement location, his office was elegant, evidence of the older building's architecture. The room was framed by floor-length bookshelves which held the knowledge of centuries. An antique lamp sat on a small table in the corner of the room. Michelson turned on the small lamp, crossed the wooden floors, and sat behind his desk, while Mark took a seat across from him. Mark smoothed his collared shirt, ran his hands through his dishevelled hair, and shifted uneasily, accidentally bumping the desk. A file fluttered towards the floor. Before Mark could react, his mentor shot his hand out and snatched the file mid-air before it touched the ground. The professor returned the file on the desk.
How are the students in your study session? Is everything going all right? What are they asking the most?
He leaned back in his chair and peeked his hands together in front of him.
They're doing well. A quarter doesn't show, but I don't blame them. It's not like attendance is required.
They should show and attend to their grades.
Mark ignored his quip.
There were some questions about the ancient Roman trade routes from the last lecture.
Yes, I wasn't able to go over that very well. We ran out of time.
I was able to explain it.
They understood.
I hope so. They didn't ask me any other questions after class.
Professor Michelson nodded. After a moment, he began to flip through a stack of campus mail flips piled on top of his desk.
You're graduating this semester. Are you ready?
He knew the professor was talking about something beside graduation. The professor wanted Mark to start a career under the guidance of the most powerful art patrons in the city. They sponsored orchestras, talented painters and actors. They'd been looking for a translator and Mark had been recommended. If it was accepted, he would participate in their art negotiations. Mark pursed his lips. On one hand, the influential group opened doors for many opportunities. On the other hand, they were secretive.
I want you to meet the Society of the Arts before you walk. We will meet this Friday at 5 o'clock.
So soon? I thought we'd meet after graduation. I have a date with Jody this Friday.
Michelson stopped looking at the mail and shot Mark an annoyed stare. Curt words came next.
Cancel it.
His expression softened with a smile.
I mean, you're not in love with her, right? You told me yourself that she was just a friend. This is your future. I made sure that the whole society was going to be at this meeting, and not everyone consistently arrives to their functions, as you showed us well this morning.
Mark's cheeks reddened. Sure, let's accept the job interview.
Okay, fine.
Just fine. Once you meet these people, your life will change forever. You're great with languages, Mark. You've successfully taken 3 of them here. This is not an easy college to succeed in, and you've made it.
I wish I was good with languages.
Thanks, Professor. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'll reschedule my date.
We've got to be practical. At the moment, you know, we're graduating. We don't know anything about vampires.
I figured you would. Now, get going. Go outside and enjoy some sunshine before your next class.
Who enjoys sunshine? Slapping Mark on the back, he sent him from his office. As Mark turned the corner to leave, he noticed the professor's smile vanish. His eyes turned sad as he watched Mark leave. Through the midnight campus, a sophomore student walked towards her dorms with her biology books tucked under her arm. It was a half moon and the flickering streetlights shone, wavering dim lights. The campus was quiet. Only students holed up in the library would be out so late. She cursed herself for being stupid. She hung out at her boyfriend's dorm studying until the resident assistant kicked her out. Campus buses didn't make their rounds past 10 o'clock, and her jerk of a boyfriend didn't bother to walk her back, making a pathetic excuse about morning classes. She usually didn't mind the historical buildings and beautiful bending trees. However, at night, their large shapes casted deep shadows blanketing the campus. She glanced at the occasional dim yellow lights in the building's entryways. Her footsteps echoed as her shoes clicked against the sidewalk. A twig snapped behind her. She gasped, turning around, her eyes darting towards the noise. A cat ran into the bushes. Kendra laughed at herself. As she turned around, she walked into a man with a green mohawk. He grabbed her arms as she stammered.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there.
That's okay with me. A little fear gets the blood pumping faster.
He tightened his grip. As his expression changed to something tinged with malice, a cruel smile slowly spread across his face. She opened her mouth to scream. Anyone watching today? Maybe not. Oh well. We'll do this for a little bit longer. And then we'll switch gears. Slapping his freezing hand over her mouth, her scream turned into a muffled squeak. Dragging her into the shadows, he threw her down to the ground. She couldn't see him well, but she felt him puncture her neck. Blood dripped onto her chest. Indra panicked. Pushing from him, she tried to run away. He shot out his arm, grabbing her wrist and pulling her towards him. Weakened, she slumped as he began to suck her neck.
Do you recognize me, little mouse? A bird told us that you were spilling secrets about the skulls. I don't mind people having fun in our club, but what happens there stays there.
The young woman froze in disbelief. Her hope quickly fizzled from hope to shock, then resignation. The co-ed knew she wouldn't survive. Sweat pooled on Mark's brow as he changed out of his drenched judo robes. His legs were starting to cramp and Mark was ready for a break. When he wasn't on the team, he enjoyed working out with the group. However, his day wasn't done. A stack of term papers was waiting to be graded back in his room. He planned to start them after a power nap. Reaching for his dorm room doorknob, Mark's hand pulled away, covered in a sticky, gooey mess. Cringing, he sniffed his fingers. Hair paste. It could have been worse. He checked the door across the hall. Same. A pair of twins which shared the room next door to Mark had a knack for being pranksters. They had tied doorknobs together, set water balloon traps in the restrooms, plastered the hall with faces of his friends on the bodies of female models. They sound delightful, not. Some Nation Storm would place them on clean-up duty for any pranks, but that didn't stop them. Mark wondered what they were doing. It was weird he didn't see them for a few days. If anything, it was a miracle if he could avoid them at all, but he still considered them his friends. Why? I wouldn't. Night passed and Mark stayed awake reading papers. Raccoon circles coloured his lower eyelids. He needed to sleep. No, he had to stay awake. He listened to the noise of the hallway. St. Mark's dorm, St. Ignatius, was crowded. Dorm life was busy. An all-guy dorm in the middle of a private Catholic St. George's. In the middle of the private Catholic St. George's University. The rules inside were as strict as the monastery. No women, no drinks. But the dorm members still managed to have some fun in between studying. Whoever actually did study. Calculus caused nervous breakdown, had forced Mark's former neat freak roommate to move out 3 weeks ago. He left a note saying, "I can't do this shit anymore, good luck buddy," on his empty bed pillow, which is still there. This left Mark as the only guy in his dorm to have his own room. At first he thought it'd be great to have a dorm room for himself, peace and quiet. Yeah, right. His neighbours made up for his lack of a roomie. No word from them still, Mark thought to himself. He had stopped by the residence at the RA's office and asked where his neighbours were. 3 days had passed since Kyle and his twin brother Nate, the twin kings of trouble, had come home. Mark welcomed the peace, but the quiet wasn't always a good sign. The red digital lights of his alarm clock showed it was early morning when Mark finally finished grading. His head nodded as his eyelids drooped. Finally he closed his eyes and let sleep take him away to dreams of Jody. A body slammed against the other side of his wall, followed by cussing, shouting and stomping. His neighbours, Nate and Kyle, were home. Mark kicked the 1950s-style concrete wall that separated the rooms.
Glad you jerks are back, but I need to sleep!
Kyle's voice hollered back.
Sorry, Mark.
The apology didn't last long. Kyle started singing off tune, probably to annoy Nate. The twins were always bickering. Mark figured it was because their brothers were so close. Despite their butting heads, they insisted on living together. Mark once asked Kyle why, and Kyle answered, "Because I don't want to learn another person's habits." The two of them reminded Mark of a grumpy old couple. Mark sighed and tried to slink back to his bed. The alarm radio snapped on. So much for any rest. Ooh, the news report of a murdered student came on the campus station. Mark turned the volume louder. "No way," he muttered to himself as he heard the grisly details of the woman's death. The murderer had not been caught. Mark dragged himself to the sink and washed his face. He hoped that Jody was watching out for herself. This had not been the first murder on campus. The last one was only a few months ago. That sorority girl's body was badly slashed. Probably to cover up the blood loss. Sliding on his Levi's. Ooh, there's no apostrophe there. Mark half-buttoned a collared shirt and gave a few random brushes to his hair and quickly gargled. He stuffed the graded essays in his duffel bag and slammed the door to his empty room. The loud bang finally made Nate and Carl stop arguing. The twins were waiting for him on the other side of the door. Carl grinned as he stepped in front of Mark, blocking his escape. Kyle stepped inside Mark's room, a grumpy Nate on his heels.
You mad, Mark?
He stared at Mark's pale face, etched with deep dark circles.
What do you think? You're still doing this stuff before morning. Remember Monday when you stole all the toilet paper from the restrooms? We had none all week because you also TP'd the head RA's office. But you weren't here this week, so I guess you didn't know that.
What about last month? That stink bomb in the air vent was pretty good.
And extra smelly.
It was awful. It was in my nostrils and my clothes. No wonder Jody stayed away. Where have you been? It's been 3 days since you both called anyone. We were worried. Never mind. I haven't slept. I swear, if Jody refuses to go out with me because I look like a zombie, I'll come back here and eat your brains!
Don't bother. Kyle doesn't have any.
Nate chuckled, and Kyle gave him a quick punch in the arm. Nate shuffled. There were red punctures on his wrist. I'm gonna ask.
What happened there?
Nate slid his tennis cuff down and hid the marks on his wrist. He eyed Mark to make sure he didn't notice his move.
Just a scratch.
It looks bad. Maybe you should have it checked out.
The RA said you've been asking where we were. Are you worried about us? Don't be. We're just having some fun.
So what were you up to?
Nate and I thought you were too busy with graduation. You're working for that hard ass, right?
Yeah, I still work for Professor Mickelson.
Oh, okay, Mickelson then. I admire him.
I admire him. Did you hear about the murder last night?
Kyle and Nate gave each other a nervous glance.
No. What did you hear?
Let's hope they're caught. Do they have any leads?
Another girl was slashed. Police are wondering if we have a serial killer.
Nate shivered.
Let's get out of here. We all need a change. I know. Let's go on a road trip during spring break. Get away from cranky professors and all this death talk.
Sounds like a plan. I'll be off then.
Yeah, I have nothing better to do with my life anyway.
That was Nate's version of an enthusiastic yes. So you're buying?
So you're buying?
She does not look happy. That was probably a really silly thing to do. Mark plans to buy lunch. I didn't know.
You're buying?
Dive's pub was dingy. I thought it was Dave's Diner. Maybe. Anyway, his table wobbled whenever the customers leaned on them, raising their voices. The people spoke loud, to be heard over rock blaring from bulky retro speakers. The place made the best hamburgers in town, and the challenge for their juicy beef burgers was the long wait in their customer line. The place was also known for their milkshakes. The thick shakes were made with the richest ice cream and served the way they were meant to be served, filled in a glass with a refill delivered on the side in its metal mixing cup. Mark slipped his receipt from the counter and made his way back to his booth with his book bag. Soon a waitress came by and set down a strawberry milkshake. 2 straws in the glass, Jody and Mark sat side by side and split the milkshake. He slowly stirred it with a spoon until it melted enough to drink from a straw. Mark thought the sweet drink was perfectly cold and delicious. Mark glanced at Jody, whose pale shirt flowed with her curves. That is a horrible sentence. A weight of anxiousness lifted from Mark's shoulders. She was safe and now with him. Let's ask about her. Jody's face lit up as she shared about her art classes. She was advancing in class. Mark noticed pale blue stains around her finger cuticles. When he asked about if they were from her latest project, she blushed from embarrassment.
Oh, I didn't even notice them. Yep, I've been working with oils, and right now we're painting still life. I've come a long way since we were in Art Composition 1. Are you still doing any artwork?
Mark answered that no, he didn't think he could draw well. He still admired art, even if he didn't have any skill. A naughty thought popped into his head. He wouldn't mind her painting him.
So, how are you holding up?
She shivered.
I'm not sure. I didn't know her, but it all happened so close to us. It could have happened to anyone.
Reaching out, Mark held Jody's hand. Jody took a deep breath.
No, I won't be scared.
No, you shouldn't be.
He'd hit the shit out of anyone who laid a hand on her, but he kept his thoughts to himself.
Is that why you wanted to meet sooner? Because you're worried about me?
She graced him with the most beautiful smile. Mark's heart jumped.
Yes, but I also can't make this Friday. Professor Mickelson set up an interview with the Society of the Arts.
What does this art thing have to do with you? You gave up sketching.
Mark suddenly wished he was naturally more artistic. He stared at her long blonde hair, the curve of her face, and pushed away at a distracting thought of what it would be like to have Jody as his model. He cleared his throat.
The Society considers language and art. They've been looking for a translator for art deals. If they like me, I get a job with them. Or at least I'm hoping that happens when I meet them Friday.
Ugh, now you reminded me. I've been so focused on finishing up our semester, I haven't made a resume yet. I need to start looking for a job too. You'll do great, Mark. I hope you get it.
Mark placed his hand on her wrist. He'd been waiting for this moment, a chance to be closer to her. He wasn't going to let her go with only a light pet. I'm going to do kiss. Took a deep breath, leaned across the table and gently kissed her lips. Bloop. The waitress walked behind the bar and lightly cleared her throat. Here's your lunch. She set the plates before them and Jody glanced at Mark and blushed. Mark muttered thanks. After she left out of earshot, Mark and Jody began talking about plans for spring break.
I'm going home to Utah.
Mark thought of a empty cold house waiting for his return.
I'm not going home.
It's because of her, isn't it?
Mikey? A sympathetic glance passed over him. Despite the anger he usually felt when others gave him that look, Mark was touched, she remembered. She was compassionate, creative, and strong. He also remembered that about her ever since he'd met her in his first art class, drawing 1305. She was working on a brightly coloured modern work. When he peeked over her shoulder to see what she coloured with pastels, she turned to face him and didn't even bother to rub away her blue chalk smudged cheeks as she gave him the brightest smile he'd ever seen. That was the first day his crush started. Now he was finally dating his friend.
Mark, it isn't your fault. What happened to your mother?
Hollow feelings swept over Mark. He shook his head, trying to clear the negative thoughts. He didn't want to think or feel about home during his date. Jodie's eyes glistened. She knew about Mark's complicated family. He didn't usually share. He could barely say it. He and his father stopped speaking. Mark had nothing to do with his old man who could forget his mother. Few people outside the family knew about the quick remarriage. Only Jodie, the twins, and Professor Mickelson knew. He'd rather be stuck at St. George's University. He'd rather be stranded in Antarctica than see the perdition of his father with another woman. Staying at college was no burden at all. Mickelson saw that Mark always had plenty of work to do.
I think Kyle and Nate will stay on campus. I might stay here and hang out with them instead.
He made peace with his father, but there was only so much he could take. His father's younger wife flirtatiously teasing him was not one of those things.
I don't blame you, Mark. It's just so sad. But I'm glad you won't be alone. Call me, okay?
I really enjoyed today. What do you think? Would you like to go on another date?
Jodie nodded. Although he kept it secret from Jodie, Mark also planned to go to a sorority party and play hard. A semester in college, after all. Oh, lovely, it's an alleyway. How are you doing, Leaky? Exiting Dive's pub, Mark walked Jodie home, passing by the various thrift stores, grungy shops, and odd curiosities which filled the eclectic line of businesses near the campus. Odd mixed smells from the city wafted from the alleyways. Mark's nose scrunched. He hated passing by this area. No one ever cleaned the streets. An elderly homeless man sat on a smudged sidewalk outside of the pub. He listlessly stretched his legs out across the ground with his tattered brown trench coat tucked under him and an open worn briefcase beside him. Buzzing flies floated nearby the still figure before zipping away. I'm going to give him some money because, why not? Reaching out, Mark gave the man a $20 bill. Ooh. Snatching Mark's wrist, the man stared at Mark's face. Mark shivered, too afraid to make a move in front of the unstable man. He shook his head and pushed Mark's hand to the money away. He returned to his still cross-legged position. Only he knew what he was waiting for. Mark slowly blacked away. Jodie close behind him. The buzzing noise became louder. The fly drifted near the beggar's face. Patiently he waited, but the fly wouldn't leave. Suddenly he shot out his hand and caught the fly in midair. With a glazed smile, he let the fly go. That was enough for Mark. He didn't want to stay on the reeking street any longer. Mark grabbed Jodie's arm and whispered.
Let's get out of here.
They quickly left the street and walked towards St. George's. The weight of his papers in his satchel reminded him he should stop by the professor's office before he went back to his own dorm. Walking across St. George's campus, Jodie and Mark neared the amphitheatre. The large outdoor theatre set in a naturally occurring hill and almost blended into the campus landscape. Next to it was an on-campus coffee house. It was a St. George tradition to buy hot drinks then bring them to the amphitheatre. Students lined outside of a nearby coffee house to buy its famous mochas, warming themselves as the night turned chilly.
Mark, let's get some coffee and catch the rest of the show.
A steaming drink in his hand sounds nice. The lack of sleep from the night before started to catch up with him. He needed that coffee. Maybe they could spare a few minutes. St. George's outdoor shows tended to be short anyway. He wanted to be with Jodie, so he fought his heavy eyelids. As far as the essays were concerned, he was ahead and the professor could wait. Mark texted the professor where he was, and the professor surprised him by responding, I'll be in my office, meet me afterwards. How long did the professor work? The man never seemed to sleep. On the platform below, stagehands dressed in full black quickly changed the key props on the set. A familiar voice spoke. A few rows behind Mark, Carl sat with his twin brother Nate.
Look, they're about to start again.
Good. Now we can finally see something interesting. I'm getting tired of watching all these couples making out. It's so annoying.
Nate rolled his eyes. Mark wondered if Nate was grumpy because he never had a girlfriend. The guy needed to get over his shyness with women. Dude. Mark waved hello, then looked around. Nate was right. There was a lot of public kissing. One student was lip-locking. Wait, that geek? The lucky bastard was an engineering major from his dorm. Mark needed a page from his playbook. He seemed to be doing pretty well. Throat cleared to his side. Whoops. Jody snagged Mark's attention away from the couple by grabbing his hand. He smiled at her and Jody returned the grin. The audience applauded as a thin actor walked out to the amphitheatre floor. Raising his arms and slowly lowering them, he quieted the audience before addressing them in a commanding voice.
Thank you all for coming, and welcome to our annual Classics Under the Stars. Let's introduce our actors. Our second performance tonight will be The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Applause. Wait for the applause, 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 applause. Mark Delaware knew the story well. Dorian Gray seeks immortal beauty and youth by cursing himself. While Dorian Gray remains useful, his painted portrait reflects the sin and depravity of his aging life. As the actor played out the changes...
Clap.
Hi, Jesse. Thank you for the resub. As the actors played out the changes of Dorian Gray, Mark became fascinated. How are you doing? He imagined everything he could do if he lived a timeless life. Ooh, foreshadowing. What could he do with that gift of time? These thoughts floated across his mind. The freedom of eternal youth. The gift of being able to study however you wanted as long as you wished. Finally being able to finish your TBR. If he was immortal, he thought he wouldn't fall like Dorian Gray. He tried to live a good life. Yes, a full life that'd continue on and on and on. Suddenly, a bad vibe and chill went down Mark's back with a shiver. He felt something dangerous was close, but he didn't understand it. Slowly, Mark turned around to see what was giving him the creeps. Oh, race stuff shortly. Okay. You do you. Ooh. Okay. Well, it's Damien and Jeonju. And then we don't know the green-haired guy. Oh dear. The twins invited a couple to sit next to them. They were followed by a pale man with bold green hair. Nate and Kyle acted as if they'd known these people, but his neighbours had never mentioned these friends before. Mark didn't like the look of the couple. Something about them wasn't right. It wasn't how they were dressed, but rather how they acted. Their dark-eyed, plain stares sharply grazed the crowd as they measured others. The guy looked about 20. He wore thick eyeliner, a skull necklace around his neck, and was dressed in full black. His style stood out compared to the hipsters and the few students who didn't care that they wore sweatpants all day. He draped his arm around a thin, pale, beautiful woman wearing a gothic Lolita-style frilly dress. As he rocked her, he whispered in her ear. Her eyes twinkled, and she smiled with closed lips at whatever he said. Nate rolled his eyes. Oh, cool. Good luck. The one with the green hair caught Mark staring. His face broke into a not-so-friendly smile. Despite the fact Jody snuggled into him, Mark couldn't focus on the performance. The people behind him were creeping him out. They laughed at parts that weren't funny. They started heavily kissing and touching each other when Dorian Gray sold his soul on stage. Ironically, the twins, who have always something to say about everyone, never said a word about their friends. Mark concluded he was judging them too harshly, probably over-analysing. He gave Jody another squeeze, and she rewarded that with a sweet smile. Damien stilled. Walking past the amphitheatre was a man in a tweed suit and bow tie. As if he sensed being watched, Professor Mike Mickelson turned and squinted eyes at Damien. A frown crossed his face as he walked away. Damien whispered,
Shit, why is that killer here? Can't you look? Do you think he's onto us? Kyle, do you know that person?
Yeah, he's Mark's faculty mentor.
He's your neighbor, right? The one who's been asking too many questions?
He's a cutie. Can we keep him?
Are you trying to make me jealous? Because it's working. I need to find out what he knows. We can't reach him now.
Sounds like fun. I'm in.
His name's Shock, then.
What are you saying? You're not going to hurt him, are you? You couldn't control yourself a few days ago. If my brother's blood and mine aren't enough, find someone else. You have to stop killing runaways.
Kyle glared at Shock.
Don't worry, we won't kill your friend. But why is Mitchelson mentoring him? Find a way to bring... Mark, was it? To us. Work with your brother if you have to.
At the end of the play, Dorian Gray earned justice for his actions. The immortality the character longed for was ruined by his guilt. Mark grimaced at the character's fate. After a standing ovation, the students filed out as they scattered to the next destination. At night, Nick and Kyle offered to walk with Mark and Jody, so the group headed to their dorms. I thought we were going to meet the professor, that he was not in his office, obviously. Nate, who loves anything dark and broody, broke his usual silence, raving about the actors. Mark waved goodbye to his friends and gave Jody one last kiss.
What? You're not coming back to the dorm. Are you going to judo practice?
Nah, Professor Mickelson's asked me to see him.
Mark, watch out for yourself. That professor's more than he seems.
All professors are eccentric bookworms.
The graded papers weighed down Mark's shoulder as he adjusted his shoulder strap. He descended downstairs straight towards Professor Mickelson's office, hoping that he wasn't too late. The professor was one of those rare, unconventional people who worked at all hours. He wasn't a workaholic, but he was a night owl. Mark had no clue where he got the energy. Mark found the professor in his cramped office, frowning over a stack of essays. With his red pen in one hand, he loomed over his students' work. The professor rubbed his eyes as he concentrated. Mark was impressed by his late-night dedication. Between committees, research, student organisations and grading, he was a busy faculty member. Mark wondered what it would be like to work in academia. It was tempting to have power, to discuss things as an equal among experts, to be dressed as doctor or professor, influence minds, maybe even change the world with a shocking discovery. The job was almost perfect, except for grading finals. Professor grimaced as he turned a page. He leaned away from a student's paper and waved it in the air.
Do my students even realize they're taking ancient civilizations? Listen to this one. Julius Caesar is a great man because he invented the Caesar salad.
Well, it's better than last year's Greeks or college students in fraternities and sororities.
Always the optimist. Keep that trait.
Professor Mickelson took the graded papers from Mark's hands.
You're freezing!
Really? I'm comfortable. You're finished with these papers? Thanks. You've been a huge help this semester. It's difficult to find a quiet moment to grade around here. I saw the tail end of the amphitheater performance outside. Your twin friends were there. I don't think I've told you, but they'd taken one of my classes before. It's unfortunate. They were with some unsavory company tonight. I advise you to stay away. Your future depends on it. Bad company is bad for the mind.
I think I know who you're talking about. They've been hanging out with Kyle and Nate since the start of the semester. Neither are doing well. Kyle and Nate are always exhausted, coming home late. I think they're getting into fights. They come home with cuts and bruises.
I'll be careful.
I'll be careful, Professor.
Very well. Did you see the performance?
Yes. This semester's theme is immortality. That's why the acting troupe chose Dorian Gray. They'll perform Frankenstein next month.
Professor stilled.
Immortality? That's an interesting choice. Do you think immortal characters are portrayed mostly as good or as evil in literary sources? Just curious.
Most stories always have them as the bad guys.
Ah, I agree. What's your opinion? If immortal beings such as vampires existed, do you think they would be evil?
If they're real, I think it'd be wrong to judge them. But what if they kill those they bite?
Very few vampires are murderers, at least in today's fiction.
Mark thought Nate would be shocked to hear that Professor Mickelson read vampire books. Sometimes Mickelson talked about his hobby. Usually when Professor Mickelson spoke about immortality of vampire lore, he was always animated, like the mystery of how these stories appeared across many societies.
Today's fiction? I thought you liked the classics.
I try to keep up with the times.
Ooh.
If you were given the
Hang on.
I try to keep...
Glancing at the doctor's tweed jacket and bow tie, Mark doubted his statement.
If you were given the opportunity to be immortal, like the vampires, would you be one?
I don't know. I'm going to leave that up, because I just need to nip to the bathroom real quick. I'll be right back. Oh, that's better. Okay. Well, I mean, drinking blood would be disgusting. I would miss food. I don't care about that one. I think I'm going to go with I'd rather hunt the bad ones.
I'd rather hunt the bad ones.
Another half hour. Hopefully we'll get to at least, plot point. St. George's University campus mourned Kindra, the murdered college student. Grey-robed monks held an outdoor Catholic mass. It was standing room only. Her dorm mates huddled, crying against each other near the altar. Mourners tried to comfort them, but they continued bawling. Ripping away her young life made no sense. Mark stared at the procession and hoped silently that no one else would be a victim. The stifling sun beat down the solemn crowd. Squeezing through the throngs of students, Mark reached the shaded sidewalk. He took in a deep breath, glad to be out of the crowds and away from the direct heat. Some of those around him wore angry expressions, others crossed their arms, some were simply stunned. Many had puffy stares or listless eyes. St. George's was a small campus, and Kindra's death affected every person. The tragedy rocked the campus, and few students felt safe. Female students now never left without at least two other friends besides them. Some students started carrying concealed weapons. The local stores sold out of mace. Two voices caught Mark's attention. The professor, looking pale and fatigued, argued with Brother Luke. I'm curious where they would fight. Usually Mickelson was polite with Mark's French professor, so it shocked Mark to see how the two were bitterly bickering. The professor kept his distance from the monk. Blessing himself with the sign of the cross, Brother Luke walked stiffly away from Mickelson as the professor frowned. A small band started to play a farewell for Kendra. Professor Mickelson joined Mark onto the covered sidewalk. He looked exhausted.
It's a shame for such a young woman to die. There's no respect.
What's going on with Brother Luke?
We are all concerned with what's going on around campus.
His eye dragged slightly to the left as he spoke. The sweet scent of sunscreen struck Mark's nose. Mickelson must have bathed in it. Mark dispassionately watched the mass. Mark was not a religious person, but he understood the campus's need to say farewell to Kendra. As he watched Brother Luke celebrating the mass with the other monks, he wondered why he and the professor fought. Eventually, something about the sacrament caught his attention. Curious by the steps in the service, Mark noticed the priest hold up something small and round. The monks declared it the actual body of Jesus the Christ. Mark didn't understand, but apparently they believed it to be so and they handled it with reverence. He glanced at Mickelson. Mickelson turned away from the sight. Mark was about to whisper to him when the monks proceeded to step among the crowd, blessing the students with sprinkles of holy water. Flick, flick. As they passed, the few present proceeded to reverently make the sign of the cross beginning by raising their hands to their forehead, touching their upper stomach, and ending the movement by touching both shoulders. The monks walked, sprinkling water left and right. Some of it landed on Mark and those beneath the shaded sidewalk. The professor slumped and leaned against the brick wall.
Are you all right?
Professor Mickelson looked ill. His breathing quickened, his skin ashen. Literally, why would you pick this place to teach? I don't know. He's got holy water on him. Should he help him up? Help him up.
Just a little weak. I think I did too much today and yesterday. Class has been cancelled, so you need not come.
Mickelson straightened himself and grimaced. Mark frowned at his pained expression.
I'll be okay. Will I see you at the Society of Arts tomorrow?
So... okay. Yep, I'll be there.
Yeah, I'll be there.
There was a missed call on his cell phone. Mark frowned. The number was one he recognised but never used. Hesitating, he pressed redial. A cheery feminine voice answered the line.
Oh, Mark! It's been a long time. How's school?
Fine.
Your father told me you're not coming home. I don't see why you don't. It's not like I'm going to bite.
I think I might be interrupting your honeymoon period.
I don't understand what's wrong with you two. Always so serious. If only you smiled some more. You're too handsome to be frowning all of the time.
Indeed.
He wants to know what you want for your graduation.
What I want?
Yes, what you want. We're not able to make it. We are going to Paris.
Why couldn't he have told me that?
Well, you know your father. It's difficult for him too, you know. You remind him too much of the past. He's trying to move on in his life. To stop mourning.
There was too much sadness that day. Mark wanted to forget it all. She was only making it worse.
So if he ignores me, he can forget about her.
Yes, Mark had some of his mother's traits, but he also inherited some of his father's. It seemed so unfair. That was the excuse his father gave every time he avoided Mark. Mark closed his eyes and tried his best to imagine his mother when she was still healthy. It was hard. For most of his teenage years, she fought to survive. Her thin hands used to stroke his cheeks and his hair. In those frail moments, his mother used to softly say how proud she was of him, now she would always love him, and that he and his father would be there for each other. However, his father's actions turned his mother's last promise into a lie.
He can send me cash instead. Or how about buying me a car? Does he think money makes me happy? Is that what you want to hear? He wouldn't care anyways. Tell him to love me enough to call me himself when you both return home.
Mark closed the phone. Something wetted his cheeks. Lifting his hands, he realised he was crying. A knock rapped on his door. He quickly wiped his face. It was the twins.
Nate and I wanted to know if you want to study at the library.
Since when are you interested in studying?
Sorry, we heard through the walls. Fight with your stepmom again?
Mark looked embarrassed. No.
No, thanks. I think I'd like to go for a walk on my own.
Sounds like a bad idea either way. We're gonna get attacked. It was dark and quiet around the campus. No one was around. Soft breeze blew past Mark. He rubbed his arms, trying to smooth the goosebumps that rose. He turned the corner around the gym. A voice from the shadows whispered next to his ear.
Found you.
I wonder if we'd have gone with the twins. Whether we'd have been safe, but I think not. I think this is a fixed point in time. A heavy weight tackled him against the gym wall. His judo reflex condition made him flip his attacker. Before he could make a step to run, the green-haired punk leapt back, handing him. A stinging throbbing pain laced through his cheek. A fist came towards him. Mark saw it coming, but he couldn't dodge it. With a loud smack, Mark was hit with an uppercut. He slumped as his shirt collar was grabbed. His attacker lifted him from the ground. Mark kicked at his feet, but the punk ignored him. Ouch! Mark couldn't move, his teeth sunk into his neck. As he hollered for help, a clammy hand covered his mouth. Mark quickly lost his strength. His green mohawked attacker gave him a bloody grin.
That will keep you quiet.
Drop that student.
Yay, teacher! The punk swung towards Mickelson. The skull charm around his neck chimed with the movement. He hissed in frustration. Shock blocked Mickelson's view of his victim.
What are you going to do? You're not the boss of me.
Mickelson pulled out a stake from his inside jacket pocket and took measured steps towards Mark's attacker.
I've been keeping an eye on you, Skulls. Don't break the code. Use only willing donors. Keep the secret safe.
Mark fought to remain conscious. Panting and keeping his hand on his neck wound, he had to think of something. Anything. He fought to stay awake. Skulls? Where had he seen that necklace before? Was this creep a vampire wannabe? He hoped the professor found help soon.
I haven't done anything wrong, Enforcer. I was thirsty.
You're killing him.
What do you care? It's just an animal.
He threw Mark to the ground and flicked open the switchblade. Mark wanted to call out to his mentor, warn him, but Mark held back. If he called out, he could fatally distract the professor. Mark shivered. He could die. They both could die.
That kind of attitude is what gets you killed!
Mickelson rushed at the vampire. The green-haired vampire stepped back as the stake swiped the front of his shirt. They grappled. Mickelson kicked out. The attacker slammed into the wall before sliding partway. He pushed himself off the wall, launching at Mickelson. Mickelson sidestepped the incoming punch. The fanged attacker stumbled before turning around. Whoa. Thunk, a sickening crack and a squish. Mickelson staked the man's chest. Horror crossed the attacker's face as he realized what happened.
I enforce the code! That's why I care.
He pulled the stake out, and the vampire fell face down with a muffled thud. I mean, most people are pretty much going to die if you stick a piece of wood through his heart. Ooh, Mark survives the deathly encounter. Is there an option where I don't survive? Mark gasped shallow breaths. Mickelson raced to him, horror and recognition crossed his face. Tearing his sleeve, he used its material to staunch the blow flowing from Mark's neck.
That son of a bitch.
Sorrow fell across Mickelson's features. Mark was proud of the professor. He stopped the campus murderer. Suddenly Mark's vision faded. He spluttered through his shallowed breaths.
Oh God! I'm gonna die!
Mickelson answered with a note of finality in his voice and a confidence Mark did not have.
No. You haven't lost all of your blood. You are not going to die today.
Awaking with a gasp, Mark found himself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling. Adjusting his position, his weight shifted on this very soft bed in a very feminine room. What, because it has flowers? It looked like something you would see at grandmother's house. Floral prints and pastels smothered the space. It smelled of clean things, fresh linen overlaying a hint of mustiness. He smacked his lips, his mouth was dry, and a faint memory of a nightmare brushed the back of his mind. Looking for a glass of water, he sat up and sharp pain stabbed his neck. Touching the tender spot, he felt for injury. His fingers met a rough bandage. Carefully lifting it, he felt 2 jagged punctures in his skin. It wasn't bleeding. He shook. What happened to him? Did someone stab his neck? A haziness fogged his mind. Each time he considered if there had been anything strange last night, wisps of memory faded before he could take root. He remembered walking around campus at night. He couldn't remember where he went afterwards. He had the impression he'd met Professor Mickelson, but he wasn't sure. As he stood, his knees buckled with exhaustion. Yeah, and I imagined blood loss. Why was he so weak? Just what had he been up to last night when the professor found him? Mark trembled and hoped he was okay. His eyes adjusted to the dim house. A bright post-it note scribbled with Professor Mickelson's messy directions was on top of the end table. Come to the dining room when you wake, M. Well, that's helpful if you don't know where the dining room is. So he had seen the professor. A quick image of shocking green hair came to his mind. Why was that? The more he tried to recall, the worse the blank spaces in his memory became. He shuffled out the room, unsure where to go. Hey, DJ! How's it going? A window revealed he was inside a canary yellow frame house with chipped paint. The front yard had a few potted flowers which had received some attention. However, the rest of the sagging neighbourhood outside the window looked as if it had been left behind with the economic recovery. He only had a unique taste, a retro 1950s couch set in the entryway, surrounded by bold, flowery wallpaper. The quaint house looked like a place where a bunch of old ladies met to drink iced tea. Wouldn't catch me there. It's very bright. Mark walked down a narrow hallway and paused before stepping into an elegant room decorated with jarring, bright-coloured abstract paintings. Where was he? Harsh voices came from the next room.
Why did you bring him? You risk everyone's safety.
We need to move up the schedule. I've been seen. He's in danger now and we don't have time to acclimate him.
I'm okay. I'm okay. It's halfway through Saturday already, and I have to go back to work on Monday, and I could do with another, month of holiday. So, the usual.
Is there no other way?
There's none. If we leave him as he is, he could tell someone, or the skulls will kill him. The code is already broken.
I don't remember anything.
He's a child.
Life isn't fair. You of all people should know that.
The voices lowered and Mark couldn't hear the rest. He shivered. Were they talking about him? He pushed open the door to the next room and cleared his throat.
Excuse me?
Ooh. At the sound of his voice, everyone in the next room turned and stared at him. Meeting the Society of the Arts. Their keen eyes studied him as they sat with nonchalant positions around a mahogany table. He didn't know what was more impressive, the room or those gathered there. They had a presence to them, the type that only leaders command. They were all drinking a deep red wine. It seemed fitting in the formal dining room with the classic-style paintings accenting each wall. They were paler than the academic hermits he knew who spent all their days indoors. Except for the, black guy. They didn't shift their cold stares from him. Counting the professor, there were 4 of them. One was an elderly woman, another young man, and a tall man in his 30s with black wavy hair. The professor's face softened at seeing Mark.
Professor, what's going on?
You were attacked last night.
I remember something about that. He bit me.
He ripped off his bandage, studying his wounds and the blooming bruise around them. The elderly woman at the opposite end of the table gasped.
Do you remember what happened next?
You saved me, I think.
I killed him.
Mark's eyes widen and he pushes the professor away. He starts to breathe faster.
You'd better sit down.
Professor Mickelson guided him to the head of a long dining room table. Murder? Even if it was self-defense, someone would notice.
Oh God, what about the cops? They'll be looking for us, asking questions. What about the body?
His eyes darted back and forth across the room. No one responded with as much as a shrug. They remained unnaturally still, watching him, waiting for his next move.
There will be no body. Vampires typically turn to dust a few minutes after death. Newer ones, well, they're not in a state of decay yet. They need to be disposed of. I already took care of that.
His voice was oddly flat as he spoke and carefully studied Mark for a moment. Mickelson's remark apparently didn't register with his young TA.
Are you saying that you're some sort of vampire hunter?
Yes, in a way.
I believe you.
I believe you.
Thousands wouldn't. Mark thought about the night before, the fanged bloody smile, the bruises, the pain, his confusion as he was lifted off the ground and later thrown down like a worthless rag. His throat suddenly dried and constricted as he realised that yes, he was attacked by a vampire. A natural creature tried to kill him. Vampires were out there in the world. No one had a clue. The myths carefully hid the truth. The vampires were more than scary bedtime stories or the romanticised creatures googly-eyed girls gushed over. Chill went through his body.
And you killed this guy. Staked him.
Yes. And I'd do so again.
So, that's why I'm here, and not at the hospital.
You see, Mark is an intelligent young man. This was the safest place I could think of to bring you.
Mark tried to clear his throat before speaking again.
May I have some water?
Mickelson poured a glass from the water decanter on the table. He greedily drank as soon as the cool wetness touched his lips.
Professor, who are these people? How are they okay about this?
This is the Society of the Arts. Unfortunately, you were put in a situation where you had to meet them earlier than we expected. Everyone, this is Mark Delaware, my apprentice and protege.
How do you do, Mark? I'm the Society's president, Don Belmonte. Please, relax. You are safe here. Now would be a good time to meet everyone, I think, since we're all here. Unless you'd prefer to rest?
Ah, they were the people he'd interviewed with Friday. Mark said a bit straighter. This was all strange, but nothing would be normal after meeting a vampire. He looked around the table. They didn't seem disappointed that he lost against this fanged attacker. If this group was familiar with vampires, maybe he could inquire them for more information.
I'm fine. Just shook up, that's all.
Very understandable with what you experienced.
Sounds a little bit like Ezio Auditore.
We've heard a lot about you. I'm Charlie Versier.
The young adult Charlie wore a fedora hat, canvas shoes, and could have easily passed as a fellow graduate from St. George's. Belmonte looked a bit older. A European accent lit his words.
I hear you practice judo, speak Francais and several other languages.
I understand that this is a society for the arts, that you support them and that you also trade art. From what Professor Mickelson told me, you're looking for a linguist. I practiced judo for 6 years. I also went abroad for a few semesters to focus on studying languages. I've also been learning Greek and Russian. Professor Mickelson was my classical history teacher.
Magnifique. Steve, I think you made an excellent choice. I like this one. Not that you need my approval. Mark, I think we'll be good friends. It's nice to have a younger face in this crowd, don't you think?
Charlie, what do you do in the society?
The society maintains and encourages the best arts of the era. I'm a musician. I've been so for over 300 years. I find those who grow that art. Belmonte looks for painters. Others who aren't here look for writers, sculptors, architects, fashion designers, etc. Mrs. Violet manages our books.
Mark thought he probably didn't hear Charlie right. 300 years? Mickelson lowered his face and smacked his right palm against his forehead. The professor made an exasperated noise.
Yes, I've been playing the viola, the bass, and a stringed instrument, really. They've always been my favorite, but especially the piano. You meet the most women when you play a piano. My first instrument was a harpsichord. While we visited Europe, my father, a Dahomey prince, insisted that I should play it like Mozart. Of course, I was never able to come close to that young child. He always impressed the Austrian courts. Then, in the 20th century, I came to America and played jazz. I love jazz. I lived in New Orleans for many decades and picked up their accent when I learned English.
There he goes again, bragging without thinking.
Steve is our local enforcer. It is good that he chose a successor, although, as he said, the timing could have been better.
Mark was taken aback that he used Professor Mickelson's first name. They must have been very good friends.
Enforcer? Wait, Professor Mickelson is like a vigilante?
Everyone around the table laughed except for the elderly woman who frowned.
He's our local hero.
And everyone here already knows about vampires.
It made sense. Professor Mickelson also shared that they participated in the art trade, and much of their group's funding came from it. Maybe they ran into a few creatures when they were making a deal or when they found a rare piece. Yep, his imagination was running away. No, not running far enough. A frail elderly woman dressed in a tailored skirt suit, silver hair tightly wrapped in a bun, wore a tight-lipped expression. She didn't miss a thing. Straightening in her chair, she clipped her words.
Professor Mickelson, did you not properly tell your protege about the society?
Shocked expressions flicked around the table.
Mrs. Violet, I wanted to explain everything to him while we're together.
Mickelson said with a tight smile, apparently trying to appease the old woman. Belmonte, the society president, narrowed his gaze.
I am normally not one to assert opinions, but don't you think it is not only dangerous, but also irresponsible to introduce him here and not mentally prepare him? The code has already been broken with this one.
Mark was quickly annoyed. For a woman that didn't normally assert opinions, Mrs. Violet easily made her own conclusion. Mickelson noticed Mark's frustration and motioned him to relax. Mark realized he'd been anxiously sitting on the edge of his high-backed chair.
Even if any of us disagree, it isn't our business anyway. It's Major Steve's decision, not yours.
She laid her hand on Belmonte's wrist. Mrs. Violet softly asked,
Do you approve of the professor's choice?
Society president glanced at Mrs. Violet with warm eyes. He looked at her hand on his and gave her a gentle smile while rubbing his fingers over the back of her hand.
I do. Whatever our friend feels is best. He's lost his family. Having a new skilled apprentice might make things easier for Steve.
You never told me you'd lost your family.
It was a long time ago. It was inevitable. I'll tell you about that someday.
Steve, I'm glad to hear you found such a promising young man as your apprentice. It'll be good to have a more personal element in art negotiations. A good linguist is hard to come by. Yes, computers can translate, but in the future, it won't replace the human need to interact. His judo will aid him when other types of negotiations will get a little sticky. I assume you plan to teach him your special talents as well, Enforcer. Your professor is the enforcer of the Vampire Code. Our mask hides our secret. Only willing donors know our truth. Keep humanity alive, lest the enforcer declares judgment. All vampires follow this rule.
A shiver went through Mark. They were serious.
We want you to consider joining us. If the only reason you will join us is because you're desperate to find work, there are other ways we can help. Think about your decision. Being in a society is a lifelong commitment. Like a fraternity, our bonds last forever. Mickelson, would you please explain this to him?
The Society of the Arts is not just an organization to promote culture. We're a society of vampires. What some would call the undead. But don't let that word fool you. We're very much alive.
That's why you turn to dust when you get staked. Of course you're alive. Mark chuckled nervously. Sometimes Mickelson would tell him a joke with a straight face. He had to be joking. Vampires? That's crazy. Professor Mickelson is some sort of top cop. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. How is he not blood loss is not a laughing matter. He should be bedridden and hooked up to a blood transfusion. He thought back to the moments he enjoyed speaking with Professor Mickelson about vampires and their places in historical tales. He'd never minded those talks. In fact, he loved them. If vampires were real, Mark thought, they'd make the world interesting. He even shared that with the professor. Maybe he should have kept his mouth shut. Those conversations and stories were supposed to be hypothetical. As he was lost in thought, Mark snapped back to the present when he noticed the others were staring at him, waiting for a response. Mark's collar felt snug around his throat and he pulled at it. After all, vampires are a myth.
You're scaring me. You're kidding, right, Professor? I mean, if you're all vampires, where are your fangs?
He gulped and realised he'd asked a room full of vampires to show him their teeth. Steve Mickelson frowned and looked offended.
If I'd suddenly told you I was a vampire and flashed a fanged smile, you'd run.
He was right. Mark knew if he'd seen a toothy grin, he would have dashed outside as fast as an all-star quarterback. Pushing back his chair, Mark was ready to do just that. He glanced behind him and prepared to sprint, in case the society had really invited him over for his dinner. He could see the headlines, college student vanishes after dinner party. Okay. I'm going to go with just stay, because... yeah.
We're not the first vampires you've met.
No, this can't be real.
A sympathetic smile crosses Professor Mickelson's face.
Did your mind try to rationalize it as a bad dream?
He's got twitchy eyes.
I'm sorry. You've seen the undead and are targeted by a very nasty vampire group called the House of Skulls. You must make a choice. Live as a donor, become one of us, or die. It is our code. I'm hoping you'll choose to be one of us.
Perhaps we'd better explain what is legend and what is truth to your student. It might make the adjustment easier.
What's there to say? He sees me daily. He knows that sunlight bothers me, but doesn't make me burst into flames. I don't walk beneath crucifixes, holy water takes away my strength, and he's never seen me eat.
Ugh, think about eating human food just makes me sick. It's awful.
We don't drink blood daily, and we can live well by only taking what we need without killing someone. People forget being bit pretty quickly. Something about our saliva heals both the mind and the flesh. Not every vampire is the same. Some force their donors to become victims. Like humans, there are good vampires and not so good ones.
Don't worry. Blood doesn't have to come from a person, but they taste better. Some humans volunteer to be our donors. They keep our secret for a price. I drink from a donor volunteer every week. Absolutely no longer than 1 month between bites. Otherwise, it's dangerous to be thirsty. Not biting makes you a little crazy.
Biting people sounds cannibalistic. Mark wondered if he was in over his head, but he was fascinated. Could they really do it? Get away with biting people every so often and not get caught? The idea that they didn't feed daily made it seem possible. A dark thought suddenly crossed his mind.
Did a vampire kill that student on campus?
Quick look of admiration crossed Mickelson's face.
You've always had keen insight. Yes, and you've met the master of her murderer before today.
That goth guy?
Mark pulled out his cell phone.
I need to tell my friends. Kyle and Nate are in trouble.
Professor grabbed his arm.
Think about what you're doing. Do you think they'll believe you if you start ranting about monsters? They'll think you're drunk. I only told you this to protect you. You're not supposed to be going around telling everyone. I thought you were ready for this. Was I wrong?
You just told me the impossible exists. What should I be feeling?
Sometimes danger is closer than we expect. If they're hanging around the skulls, then they might already be in over their heads. We don't know. I want to give you the opportunity to live like us. I'd become a permanent mentor to you. You'll have the chance to study centuries. That's all I'll share. If you decide to join us, then I'll explain the rest as you adjust to your new life. I want you to think about this.
And if I say no, that I don't want to become a vampire?
Professor Mickelson, I knew it was dangerous to bring this boy here. Child, you have no choice. If you reject us, you'll be killed by the House of Skulls. What? I'm not going to coddle the boy. He could also become a blood donor.
Unacceptable. No one is going to feed from Mark. I forbid it.
Careful, Steve. You may be the enforcer, but this is my society that you are speaking to.
Ma'am, I've been thinking, why was Professor Mickelson weak to holy water?
It drains us. Unless we have faith, we cannot get near religious objects. It is not painful, just uncomfortable.
We forsake any divine plan and choose not to live a mortal life.
But vampires live forever, right?
As long as we're not murdered or there's no major accident, we live for a very long time.
Hearing the facts from Mrs. Violet calmed Mark, but what she said bothered him. There was a thought and a warning poking the back of his mind, but he couldn't remember something crucial about vampire law. A just, new life? It was hard for Mark to believe. Vampires shouldn't exist. Mark had never considered them real before. They were something in stories. Immortality was offered in front of Mark and it tempted him. I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to have to drink blood or kill anyone, but, I think immortality would definitely have to come with my knees not hurting, my back not hurting, and me not being exhausted all the time. And then I'd actually have time to do all the things that I wanted to do. So, but I can also imagine getting a bit bored. So yeah, I definitely have to come with energy. If it came with energy, that would be good. Oh, hang on. Did I actually read that? Yeah, I did. Okay. He hesitated. If he accepted the professor's offer, he'd be able to witness centuries. To become a scholar of humanity as ages passed. He'd also live as most men only dreamed, being young forever. But if Mark accepted the professor's offer, he'd also have to give up his normal life, including dates with Jodie. Mark figured it'd be impossible to hide vampirism from Jodie. He knew that he'd never age like she would. He'd always be in his 20s. He'd have to give her up, and he didn't like that thought. Mark thought about his mother, cancer sapping away her strength, her skin frail and cracked, her hair thinning and limp, her whispered words of love as she faded. No, he didn't want death either. He didn't want to fade and disappear in the world, forgotten, forever lost. I don't like not having a say.
You said I have to be a donor. I don't like not having a say.
We'll find someone you're comfortable with and they'll pay for your blood. You don't even have to be bitten.
What's with the characters with the flickery eyes? I think it's attempting blinking. It's just not working very well. Mark glared at them. The whole situation seemed like a bad deal. He didn't think he could ever trust Professor Mickelson again.
How long have you two known?
For a while. Tried to warn you to stay away from the professor. He kills vampires. Has a bad reputation with them.
I think everyone has a bad reputation with the House of Skulls.
We don't.
What did they promise you? Why do you stay with them?
They're vampires. They said we'd be one of them.
You lost your chance. Why did you say no?
I like freedom.
I like freedom. Whether it was me being a vampire or being human and allying with them. Somebody was going to be controlled by somebody else.
I mean, we're probably gonna die, but, you know.
I would have given anything to be one. You're so lame.
At least I'm alive.
For now.
You're late. I've been waiting downstairs.
He gave her a quick kiss.
Thanks for walking me back to my dorm.
Did you finish studying?
Yes. I can't wait until finals are over. As soon as they are, let's go back to the dive where we had hamburgers.
A milkshake does sound good. How could anyone give up ice cream?
You like them that much?
Oh, well, yeah. I think eating is one of the joys of life. We only live once.
Jody laughed and pulled him along by the hand. Okay. Nothing's really changed on our status thing. Suddenly a dark shadow crosses beside them. Man in black crossed his arms and stopped them. A cruel smile crossed his face.
Your professor isn't around to protect you this time. You should have died.
What is he talking about?
Go away! You killed those campus girls, didn't you?
Jody gasped. She started to dig in her purse.
They were nobody. Why do you care what my friends and I do?
You're not invincible.
But I'm pretty close.
Are you invincible against one of these? Ah!
Metallic click. With firm hands, Jody shots pepper spray.
I've called the cops. Don't you ever bother me or my boyfriend again.
Okay, lady. He and I were just joking. That's all. I'm going.
When he was out of sight, Mark gave Jody the biggest hug he could. Yeah, so much for him protecting her. The campus police arrived later and asked a few questions. There were no other reports of campus deaths after that night. Did we get an ending? That'll be good. 2 years passed. Mark remembered his promise to the society and chose to be the donor of a hippie vampire group called the Culture of Love. This was the exchange required by the code. Once he had proven he could keep the vampires a secret, then he'd be given the choice to stay as a donor and return to a more normal life. The Culture of Love was very casual compared to the society. Mark started going to church and he made sure he kept a cross around his neck on the days he wasn't with them. He knew what dangers lurked around. Nate and Carl didn't act the same. At first they tried to become closer to Mark because they learned he'd finally decided to become a donor. When they realised he again turned down an offer to become a vampire, they separated from him. Eventually they stopped being friends with Mark.
I wasn't expecting a call from you.
Mark, your father and I have been talking. We want to support you. Let's not avoid each other anymore. Our son should know his brother.
His heart clenched. His father had more than moved on after his mother. His little brother was a final reminder of that. He paused before answering.
Yeah, he should know his older brother.
Really? You mean it? Oh, thank goodness! When can he come visit?
How about Thanksgiving?
That'll be wonderful. I'm sure your father will appreciate the family being together again.
And set a place for one more. There's someone I'd like you to meet.
Jody. Hopefully. Okay, this is taking longer to get to the ending. That's fine.
It's so good to see you again.
I've decided not to renew our donor contract, Anaya.
I knew this day would come. I'm not surprised. I still can't believe you chose to be a donor for the Culture of Love over the Society of the Arts. I thought for sure you'd wish to stay with them.
I told you before, I felt too rushed with them. Your group is more relaxed, more human.
I didn't mind. I got a handsome donor out of their trouble. You could always stay with us, as a donor or a vampire. You're so groovy. You fit in with us.
Okay.
I know you didn't want to be the Enforcer's Tyro, but maybe we can make it easy. I know you probably can't keep close to your family as one of us, but maybe we can find a way.
She smiled sincerely, and Mark knew he'd always be welcome. However, he liked living a simple life as a human.
No to both. You're great, Anaya. The Culture of Love is a fun group, but I need to live my life. It's no place to make a future or start a family. I want to reconnect with my home. Can't do that as a vampire. They'll notice that Uncle Mark never ages.
That's true. Humans get jealous easily.
I want to have my own family with a white picket fence, a dog, and snotty-nosed kids. Vampires can't have children, and adopting one as a vampire wouldn't be safe.
You're right. Hanging out with vampires isn't secure for a family. Our peacefulness isn't shared by the whole community.
Reaching into his pocket, Mark pulled out a velvet-covered box. Cracking it open, he showed Anaya a ring. Heat rose to his cheeks.
Do you think Jody will like it?
I think she loves you. I think she'll be a wonderful wife. Yes, she'll like the ring. Why did it take you so long to ask her?
I've learned my lesson. I'm going to take more time on major decisions.
I don't blame you, dear. You're fortunate she waited for you. May you always live in peace.
Standing beneath the light of the stained glass windows, Mark looked up into the light.
Good. You're still wearing the cross I gave you. I'm glad you're here, and that you finally cut ties with those fanged. If you had stayed with them...
I know she wouldn't be safe. I didn't want to live a double life with her. She doesn't deserve that.
No, she's a beautiful woman, inside and out. She loves you, and you love her. She wouldn't be safe around them. No one really is. Will any of them be here?
Don't worry, they won't. And the professor and I haven't spoken in years.
That's for the best. He probably couldn't enter here anyways. The cross alone would stop him.
Jody walked into the church slightly out of breath.
Sorry I'm late. I had trouble finding parking.
Well, it's about time. Let's rehearse. I'll get you two married before you change your mind about him.
Hey!
Jody giggled and hugged Brother Luke.
I did wonder if we were ever going to marry.
We're here now. That's what counts.
Great. Let me show you both where you'll be standing when you take your vows.
We'll be together forever.
Strange look crossed Mark's face. He looked up at the crucifix.
As long as forever is naturally meant to be.
Good end 1. Yay! Thank you for reading our story. Please rate the game and tell your friends. These actions help any game to succeed. Got an ending. That's cool. A human is the way to be. Cool. Okay. Well, that's better than like just having half a story and whatever. So you can actually just choose to remain human. So the vampire, we didn't actually become a vampire. So it's probably way longer if you become a vampire and stuff. But I'll do the other endings or some of the other endings together. We've still got, we only got 3 achievements. We've still got 9 of those to go. I'll do those off stream. I'm going to switch games, but we're going to have a quick pause first. So I'll put the ending screen up to bookend this section, but we will be back with another game after the break. So thank you for watching this part of the stream. Twice Reborn, a vampire visual novel. I think you do ID at Xbox for the code. And I will be back in a few minutes with another game. Catch you then.